for some more r/NoSleeps. I know it's been a minute since I have made some of these videos, and I do apologize for that. Life has been not good and very crazy lately, so I haven't really been motivated enough or had the time or energy to do any other videos aside tasting videos with my brothers. But since I somewhat have the energy and the time, since I have the next 3 days off work and I'm not doing anything as of right now, I might as well get some of these videos done, just so I do have videos to post for you guys, so it doesn't get too lengthy of me not posting for a while. And you guys do seem to enjoy when I read creepy shit. So yeah, let's just get right into it. So this one is called A Shattered Life. It is pretty lengthy. I will try not to read too fast, and if I stumble over my words or don't know what a word is, I apologize. I am not big-brained, so yeah. There we go. Just so you can see it a little better. Thanks. Okay. I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you where it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur, and it was, for a lack of better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there was no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the arc it leapt at me, and there was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it stuck, I felt a distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs and torso seemed fine, and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard for me to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. For a while, that subtle drain on my spirit became lost in the ebb of flow of caffeine in my system. You could say my life began that week, actually, because that was when I met Mar. She and I got along great, though to be honest, I'm pretty sure I fell in love with her over the phone before we even met. It was almost as if the strong emotions of the first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched onto some invisible part of my being. Sorry, hold on. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of the neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later, at work, a coworker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I had figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in the bathroom at my home, when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in a full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I didn't manage to get home, but the experience had forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. Mara showed up that evening, but she had her own key. "Hey," I asked her with confusion, "how'd you get a key?" She just laughed. "You're cute. Are you sure you're okay with this?" She opened a door and entered a room full of boxes. I know living together is a big step, especially when you've only been dating for 3 months. Living together? I'd literally just met her the week before. Thing was, my mother had always called me a smart cookie for a reason. I knew when to shut my yap. Instead of causing a scene, I told her everything was fine, and I went straight up to my room to begin investigating. My things were just as I left them, with no sign of 3 months gap in habitation. But I did find something out of the ordinary. The date. I shivered angrily as I processed the truth. The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. What the hell was I facing? What kind of creature could consume pieces of one's soul like that? I missed the most exciting part of a new relationship, and I never understand any shared stories or in-jokes from that period. Something absurd, precious had been taken from me, and I was furious. The fury helped suppress the entity. I never embedded alcohol. I drank coffee religiously, and I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live every day while observing nothing more than a minor alteration. a social fact here and there, someone's job, how many kids they had, and that sort of thing, the layouts, the nearby streets, and the time my favorite television show aired, and that kind of thing. Always those changes remind me that some creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story, and right at the height of the action, a young boy came up uh, to my lounger and shook my arm. Surprised, I asked, "Who are you and how did you get in here?" He laughed and smiled brightly. "Silly daddy." My heart sank in my chest. I knew immediately what had happened. After a few masked questions, I discovered that he was 2 years old and that he was my son. The agony and heartache filling my chest was nearly unbearable. Not only had I missed the birth of my son, I would never see or know for the first years of his life. Mara and I had obviously gotten married and started a family in the time I'd lost, and I had no idea what joys or pains those years contained. It was snowing outside. Holding my son's son in my lap, I sat and watched the flakes fall outside. What kind of life was this going to be if slips in concentration cost me years? I had to get help. The church had no idea what to do. The priest didn't believe me, and told me I had health issues rather than some sort of possession. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in for return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell Mar. There was no way to know what this was all going to look from her side. What what was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser, but I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I actually wasn't home inside my own head. But that night I set up a nice dinner in preparation. She had arrived by not unlocking the front door, but knocking on it. I answered, and she found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by a setting at the table. "A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me." Thank the Lord, I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I'd gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat her down for our second date. Through carefully crafted questions, I managed to deduce the truth. This was really our second date. She saw the relief and happiness in me, but interpreted this as dating jitters. I was just excited to realize the entity wasn't necessarily eating whole portions of my life. The symptoms, as I was beginning to understand them, were more like the consequences of a shattered soul. The creature had wounded me, broken me into pieces. Perhaps I was to live my life out in order, but at least I would actually get to live it. And so it went on for a few years from my perspective. While minor changes in politics or geography would happen daily, major shifts in my mental location only happen every couple months. When I found myself in a new place and time in my life, I just shut up and listen, making sure to get the lay of the land before doing anything to avoid making mistakes. On the furthest flung leap yet, I met my 6-year-old grandson. Asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said, "A writer." I told him that was a fine idea. Then I was back in month two of my relationship with Mar, and I had the best night with her on the riverfront. When I say the best, I mean the best. Knowing how special she would become to me, I asked her to move in. Got to live through what I missed for the first go around, and I came to understand that I was never mentally absent. I would always be there eventually, and when we were moving her boxes in, she stopped for a moment and said she marveled at my great love, as if I'd known her for a lifetime and never once doubted she was the one. This was the first time I truly laughed freely and wholeheartedly since the entity had wounded me. She was right about my love for her, but for exactly the reason she considered a silly romantic analogy. I had known her my whole life, and I'd come to terms with my situation and found peace with it. It wasn't so bad to have sneak peeks of all the best parts ahead, but of course I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd want to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was buried deep in my psyche, fracturing into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began only having weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared the ultimate fate would jump between times in my life, heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused and forever lost. Only the instant each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. As a true depth of fear came up upon me, I sat in an older version of me and watched the snow falling outside. That was the one constant in my life. The weather didn't care who I was or what pains I had to face. Nature was always there. The falling snow was always like a little hook that kept me in place. The pure emotional peace it brought on like a pancreas on my mental wounds. Panacea? I don't know that word, I'm sorry. And yet I never shifted while watching the patterns falling white and thinking of the times I'd gone sledding or built a snow fort as a child. A teenager touched my arm. Grandpa? He startled me out of my thoughts, so I was less careful than usual. Who are you? He half grinned as if I was if not sure if I was whether I was joking. He handed me a stack of papers and said, "It's my first attempt at a novel. Would you read it and tell me what you think?" Ah, of course. Pursuing the dream of a writer, I see. He's burned a bright red. Trying to, anyways. All right, run off. I'll read this right now. The words were blurry and annoyed. I looked for glasses I probably had for reading. Being old was terrible. I wanted to leap back into a younger year, but not before I had read this book. I found my glasses in my sweater pocket and began leafing through. Mara puttered in and out of the living room, still beautiful, but I had to focus. I didn't know how much time I would have. It seemed like that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize trumped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now an adult, walk by with his wife on the way out of the door. As a group expanded, uh, the extended family began sliding outside. Finally, I had finished reading the story, and I called out for my grandson. He rushed downstairs and into the living room. How was it? Well, it's terrible, I told him truthfully, but it's terrible for the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people. But the structure of the story itself is very solid, I paused. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story. He nodded. It's a reflection of times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopefully like they used to be. You're far too young to be aware like that, I told him. An idea occurred to me. If you're into horror, do you know anything about strange creatures? Sure. I read everything I can. I love it. Wearily, I scanned the entrances to the living room. Everyone is busy outside, and for the first time, I opened up to someone in my life what I was experiencing. In hushed tones, I told him about my fragmented consciousness. For a teenager, he took it well. You're serious? Yes. He donned the determined look of a grown man accepting a quest. I'll look into it, see what I can find out. You should start writing every down your experience. Build some data. Maybe we can map out your psychic wound. Wow, sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I haven't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? Let's come up with somewhere for you to leave them, he said, frowning at the thought. Then I'll get them, and we can trace the path you're taking through your own life to see if there's a pattern. For the first time the situation had gotten worse, I felt hope again. How about downstairs? Nobody ever goes under there. Sure. He turned and left the living room. I peered at him. I heard banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with the box, laid on it laid it on the carpet and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He explained, "Holy crap!" But of course, being a teenager, he really didn't really say crap. Taken back, I blinked rapidly, forgiving his cussing because of the shock. Did I write those? He looked at me with wonder. Yeah, or you will. You still have to write them and put them on the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers, then covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. They could get weird. That much I understood. Right. He gulped. There's like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a long time. His tone dropped to seriousness. But I will save your Grandpa, because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you so much. Then then I was young again and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, and while those weeks became days and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs in order. My first box was actually the 13th, and my last box was the first. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective, and once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. Oh, sorry. I put my head down and stopped looking. I couldn't stand the river of the changing awareness any longer. Names and places and dates and jobs and colors and people were all wrong and different. I never been older. As I sat watching the snowfall, a man at least 30 and I vaguely recognized entered the room. Come on, I think I finally figured it out. I was so frail that moving was painful. Are you him? Are you my grandson? Yes, he took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. How long have you worked at this? I asked him aghast. Tell me you didn't miss your life like I'm missing mine. His expression was both stone cold and furiously resolute. It'll be worth it. He brought two thin metal rods to my arm, then nodded at the mirror. Look, the shock is carefully calibrated. The electric zap from the device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down from my eyebrows and touching each ear. Its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. It was a parasite, and it was feeding on my mind. My now adult grandson held my hand as I took in the horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearfully I asked, "Is Mar here?" His face softened. "No, not for a few years now." I could tell from his reaction what had happened, but I didn't want it to be true. "How?" "We have this conversation a lot," he responded. "Are you sure you want to know? It'll never make you feel better." Tears brimmed my eyes. "Then I don't care if it hurts or if I die. I don't want to stay in a time where she's not alive." He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked, "I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had tons of help from other researchers to the occult. The parasite doesn't technically exist in our plane. It's one of the lesser spawns of whatever that is, and feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness and reality. When details like names and colors and objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing stance as the creature ate its way through you." I didn't fully understand. I looked up in confusion as he placed the circuit of electronics like a crown on my head, and the exact line of the parasite's mouth uh, had rang me. "What's Ubru?" He paused, and his work grew pale. "I forgot you wouldn't know. You're lucky, believe me." After a deep breath, he began moving again and placed his fingers near a few stitches. "Ready? This is carefully tuned to make your nervous system extremely unappetizing to the parasite, but it's basically electroshock therapy." I could still see Mars smile even though she was dead. I had just been with her moments ago. "Do it." The click of the switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then I saw the mirror shaking and my body within the image convulsing. Oh no, it did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. As my vision as my vision shook and fire burned in every nerve of my body, I could see the reflecting, trembling light silhouettes of the parasite on my head as it withered in agony equal to mine. It had claws, 6 clawed lizard-like limbs under its leech-like body, and cut into me in to attempt to stay latched on. The electricity made my memories flare. Mars' smile was foremost, lit brightly in front of a warm fire as the snow fell past the window behind her. The edges of my memory began lighting up, and I realized that my life was on a continuous stretch of experience, that it was only the awareness of it that had been fragmented by the feasting evil on my back. I never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I'd jump around a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mars' hand and be there for her. No, no! The moment had shifted seamlessly into holding her hand as she lay in the hospital bed, for a very different reason. Not this. God, why? It was so merciless to make me remember this. I broke down in tears as the nurses rushed into this room. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to experience it. I'd seen all the good parts, but I wanted the worst part, the inevitable end that would one day face. It wasn't worth it. It was tainted. All that joy was given back 10,000 folds as pain. The fire in my body and my brain surged to the sheer white torture, and I screamed. My scream faded into a surprising shout as the machine's electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh God. I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence meaning, the same blank on reality. It crept forward just like before, but this time it hissed and turned away. I stood astounded at that being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He made me an unappetizing meal so the predator of my mind and soul had moved on in its search from a different snack. I returned home in a daze. After a while of sitting there processing all that had happened, the phone rang. I looked at it in awe and sadness, and I knew who it was. It was Marjorie, calling for the first time for some trivial reason she admitted 30 years later that she made up just to talk to me. But I could tell she was lying in the hospital bed dying. It was going to end unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man, left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have left is sitting and watching this falling snow. But now, thanks to my grandson, I would also have my memories, and it would be a wild ride no matter how it ended. On a sudden impulse, I picked up my phone, and with a smile I asked, "Hey, who is this?" Even though I already knew. Wow. That is. So, if you didn't understand what that was about, it was pretty much about having Alzheimer's, as it says in the author's note. Um, that I never knew. I mean, I know that having Alzheimer's is like one of the most like scariest things. I definitely am glad no one in my family has it because I have seen like what it's like for other people, and I could never even fathom. Like, I already forget things enough, but to have Alzheimer's is to I I can't even put into words how scary that would be, and like how just imaginably terrifying it must be for that person and for them to not know what the fuck is going on. But like, holy hell, like, and for you to and for people to like turn it into a horror story is another thing. Like, I don't know, the brain is an interesting thing. Mental illnesses, I could rant on about it, and I have in multiple videos before for like the longest time. But like, you know, it's interesting, but it's also really fucking real and really fucking scary. But yeah, that was A Shattered Life. I hope you all enjoyed that. Yeah, everything on my socials is down below, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you're notified when I make videos. And I love you guys, and I will see you guys later.